Sir, our business editor would like to ask a question. Alvin, go ahead.
According to the Indian Embassy website, it seems that total trade between the Philippines and India declined from the 2017 to 2018 level. Correct correct me if the figures are wrong. According to their website, total trade between our two countries reached 1.1 billion as of the second quarter of this year. This compare and if you compare this with the 2017 and 2018 figure of $2.45 billion and $2.32 billion in 2018 and 2019, the the decline is very noticeable, at least to me. Of course, the decline in total trade this in the second quarter of this year can be attributed to the pandemic because economic activities around the world. But besides that, in your opinion, what are the other reasons behind this decline?
Well, you see, you're right. There's been a bit of a fluctuation, but I wouldn't call it a decline and a sustained secular growth. This year is a bad year to assess, trade patterns because, as you know, this is been a very tough year for everyone.
Yeah.
But in general, what we notice is that the trade figures are somewhere between 2 to 2.3, $2.4 billion consistently over the past 2 years. There've been a year or two when it's been a little lower. And what we see as potentially contributing to growth is, as I said, there've been a few sectors where India's exports to the Philippines are doing well, and Philippines has been consistently exporting also about $500 million, $600 to $700 million to India, which is also a fairly diverse mix of products. So I don't see a concern in the broad trade because of one product or the other. 1 year may be a little lower, but what we want to do is to find a way to structurally improve the access to each other's markets. And wherein India has competitive interests and where Philippines have competitive interests, if you can share that list and bring our two trade bureaucracies to agree to that, I think that would be the objective that we are trying to go towards. We don't have a very clear sense at this stage as to what the Philippine products of interest would be, where they are looking for us to offer some tariff liberalizations. But we have a few areas that we have projected to the Philippines.
A follow-up to that, would automotive be one of those interests, Ambassador? I know that Tata Motors is already distributing cars here. Mahindra, of course, has some limited
Automotive
exposure.
is definitely an area of great promise, and both in terms of two-wheelers and in terms of light commercial vehicles. One of the interesting proposals that I've been trying to follow up is a proposal by an India-based company to create a new jeepney manufacturing facility, a jeepney replacement manufacturing facility in the Philippines.
Interesting.
That would be a very interesting project. But of course, it needs to bring together various decision points on the Philippine side, because it's, the company had some very interesting discussions. This is the Ashok Leyland company. And they, I think, are very strong on automobile technology. They'd like to create some facility here. India's two-wheelers, for instance, are also very competitive. But unfortunately, I think the tariff that is applied on Indian two-wheelers as compared to some of the other competitors is very high. But we are aware, and we've spoken to some of your industry representatives, and they say that the quality of products that you're getting from some of the other competitors on two-wheelers is not adequate. It is creating a lot of problems because Indian products in the two-wheeler segment, India is one of the largest manufacturers of two-wheelers in the world. And we know that Philippines being very far-flung, the road infrastructure may not be very good. So you need hardy two-wheelers for people to move around. And we are willing to look at this as an area. And of course, if there is a potential, we would like to see how, if the market is large enough, how we can encourage some of our companies to move some of the production here. So automobiles, definitely. Automobile components from the Philippines are going into India and from India coming into the Philippines. I know there's an interest in automobile products, rubber products for the automobile sector where India is quite strong. These are areas that we are focusing on. Automobiles, surely, and the new thing is e-vehicles.
E-vehicles, yeah.
So there too, India has some programs underway. We need to have more discussions on
Yeah.
it, but it's a priority area.
That sounds pretty promising. Our reporter May Caraballo also has a question. May, are you still with us?
Good morning, Mr. Ambassador. You mentioned earlier the strong engagement between India and the Philippines in terms of IT BPO sector. My question is, can you elaborate on this area, and has a strong collaboration between the two countries already materialized into investments into the Philippines? Thank you.
The answer is a resounding yes. The Indian companies, all major Indian software companies, consultancy services, our largest company is present here. Wipro, which is another large company, is actually the single biggest employer in the Visayas, foreign employer. They have about 10,000 people working in Cebu. They were one of the early movers to Cebu.
Wow.
Yeah, and this is there. And the beautiful thing about this is I had a meeting with them about a month ago. They're hiring. They're going to be hiring about 15,000 new employees over the next 2 months. And I said, this is wonderful, because here's the pandemic when people are being, forced to move out of their jobs, and here is the sector which is growing. And the latest data bears it out that the exports of software services from the Philippines, which is your single biggest services export, about close to $30 billion, they have held up well. The decline is marginal, if at all, and there's an expectation that it will go up. So the sector is doing well. Indian companies are invested across the space. There are about, I would say, close to 20 companies from India who are invested in the sector, and they would like to expand their presence in the Philippines. They're doing a lot of good work. The embassy is trying to cooperate with them to see if we can do more work in education. I think we need to, what I've been trying to request them is to contribute more actively towards, this new trend of distance education, whether by providing hardware, because in some of the village schools, the hardware that these companies use, the computers, etc., they can be decommissioned after 2 or 3 years, but they're still good for another 3-4 years. So perhaps we could have a system whereby we could transfer them to some of your village schools, which really need infrastructure at the moment. And I sense a great receptivity among them. They're already, what is happening currently is because they are in the PESA zone, there are some restrictions on what they can do to bring some of the things into the general economy of the Philippines. So we will hopefully, once the COVID is sort of allows more intense interactions with Filipino government, we will work with your government and the local governments to see how we can, make the administrative fix that is needed to allow them to donate these computers, maybe refurbish them a little bit to, less developed regions, and so they can be connected into the whole digital education thing. So companies, yes, they're doing well, but they need to give, as much. They are doing also some CSR, but they need to do more. And I believe that the spirit in these companies, where I say that it's almost entirely Filipino driven, all these companies are 98% Filipino. So the spirit in this company is very high, and we need to also move to the next generation. We need to use this connect that we have to do new things like big data, and to do centers for education in things like artificial intelligence and Internet of Things. Can we make that transition? Government of India would like to support it in some form, so through some initial funding, etc. What we can also do is to bring India's e-governance, successes to the Philippines, whether it's tele-education. And one interesting thing that I have, which I'd like to offer to the Philippines government for consideration, is India has this massive fiber optic network that we've set up. It's called BharatNet.
What is it?
Bharat is the Hindi word for India. So BharatNet.
Okay.
And this is, what it is doing is that wireless connections have their limitations. And especially in a country like the Philippines with very far-flung areas, it's important to have reliable, low-cost, and good bandwidth connectivity. So what is needed, I think the Philippines government has some initial project, a pilot project here, but we would be interested in a discussion whether we could scale that up, bring in Indian, some amount of concessional Indian funding to see how we could build this as a national project for the Philippines and support it. India has a line of credit for ASEAN on digital connectivity as well as physical connectivity. So we want to try and leverage some of the mechanisms that exist. So on the digital side, very promising avenues, and we look forward to, once this pandemic is over, having a full-on engagement in this area.
That sounds very exciting. I mean, it's something, connectivity is something that we really are focusing on these days. Well, especially because of the pandemic when we were all locked down. Most of us now are working from home. In fact, that's why you see very different backgrounds for the people you're meeting you're here. But
let me just say that it is good to be part of the 5G and the other buzzwords, but let's not forget the half of the population that is not going to be able to access it. And getting 5G into the regions, etc., is a long-term goal. It's a desirable goal, but it's going to be expensive and it's going to be time-consuming. But in the meantime, you want to connect those communities to the digital highways.
Right.
We need to work together, and we are willing to work together. And I think the Philippines government is also very, very open and receptive to these ideas.
Are there any movements there? I mean, any serious discussions, or these are all exploratory at this point?
No, we've had some engagement. We are proposing an MOU between our Ministry of IT and the DICT of the Philippines.
Oh, wow.
That will provide the framework to have this discussion. And there are many other interesting areas, but this one is, I think, particularly promising in the current context.
Yes, yeah, I agree. Are the students in India, are they back in school, or are they also doing remote learning like our students?
There are states which have opened schools.
Also depends.
It is varied across the country. In some, what they've done is they've got some classes coming in the morning and some classes a little later, so they just decongested the schools a little bit. And in areas where there is a spike in cases, because the local authorities are not very confident about it, they have not allowed face-to-face schooling. But it's opening up. It's opening up, and more kids are coming back to school.
Well, one of the things that encourage more cooperation are the travel linkages. I know for a while Philippine Airlines was flying to India, but I believe that has since stopped. But are there any developments there, maybe from India's part?
I'm glad you asked this, because this is one of my top priorities and my government's top priorities, to establish direct flight connections between India and the Philippines. There have been some attempts in the past, but they have not succeeded because we focus purely on bilateral traffic.
Mm-hmm.
My suggestion, which I have floated to a couple of airlines, and in fact, I'm meeting the Cebu Pacific chief next week, and I've had some interactions back home with Indian Airlines, is to bring about a partnership between Indian Airlines and Filipino Airlines, so that Philippines can become a hub for Indians traveling to North America, to Australia, to New Zealand, because you have flights already there. And in turn, you could use India as a hub maybe to fly to Europe or to fly to other parts of South Asia, to even parts of West Asia, etc. So this will add the necessary sort of mass for a sustained flight operation. And also the trend in right now in international civil aviation is something that nobody can anticipate, because all the airlines are going through a lot of difficulties. But there are some airlines which are doing better. And I think as the pandemic eases off, in 2019, we had 100,000 tourists from India to the Philippines.
100,000, wow.
Boracay is very popular among Indian honeymooners. I think this is going to increase, because your beaches, we had close to 2 million tourists in Thailand from India last year in 2019.
Oh, wow.
So what we had the first joint working group that we had on tourism, from the embassy, we insisted that we should have the travel business part of it rather than having it purely as a conversation between officials. So we should bring the industry and the trade together. I believe also I've had discussions with the DFA to request for a more liberal tourist visa arrangement, especially for families and groups. And I think they're looking at it. So that can propel tourism, I believe, considerably. I mean, we should be able to double tourism numbers once the pandemic eases. A lot of interest in travel will be there. And if we can introduce this direct flight, and if we can promote our tourist destinations in each other's countries. I noticed with envy that the Japanese received 500,000 Filipino tourists. I would like to get a chunk of that to India. But India is also very rich culturally. I know Filipino people are very interested in Indian culture. A lot of Filipino women that I've met love shopping in India. There's a lot of fabrics and things like that to buy. So I believe that there is wonderful opportunities for bringing this two countries in civil aviation and tourism sector working together, creating the Philippines as a hub. Because if you make it a hub for travel, and there are 4 million Indians in the United States alone, a large chunk of them live on the West Coast. Wow. Why not travel through the Philippines? Why travel through Europe?
Right.
So, and then those people could spend a few days here. They could contribute to the local economy, and,
right.
tourism would increase. So it's
have a brief holiday.
Looking at it, which makes commercial sense, and it'll happen.
Some of my Indian Filipino friends were saying that when Philippine Airlines started flying to India, they made the mistake of flying to New Delhi instead of Mumbai. And they said that there was probably more justification to have Mumbai as a destination because of the business linkages rather than the political linkages. What are your thoughts there?
I would leave that basically to the commercial planners to look at. I'm not too sure. I see the logic of Mumbai as the big financial and commercial center in India. But if I'm looking at it as from the model that I'm looking at it, which is not purely from a bilateral logic, but from a larger hub and spoke logic, many cities in India into the equation. It could even be a South Indian city. It'll be a commercial decision for the airlines. But I have one Indian airline that's very strongly interested, and I'm engaging with both the major airlines in the Philippines. And if we can get that partnership going, that'll be a win-win.
That would be fantastic. And what is it that you require for Filipino tourists to visit India? What are the visa requirements?
One of the things that we've done recently is that we've made our visa system very simple and very cheap. So you can apply online for an electronic tourist visa.
Okay.
It will be given to you in 72 hours. And it costs you less than $40. So in some cases, up to $25. I don't know which, depending on the duration. So it's very cheap, and it's very easy to apply online, and guaranteed within 72 hours. So tourist visas, absolutely not a problem. We of course also have a visa office in Manila, where again we are making it easier. We've done away with the personal presence requirement. We are making provisions for people to apply by post, etc. So visas for India, absolutely no problem.
You mentioned that there are 2 million Indians who go to Thailand. Does Thailand require Indians a visa to visit that country?
Thailand is giving us a visa on arrival.
Maybe that's something the Philippines should also consider.
We did propose that. There was
Yeah.
some sensitivity around it because I think you also have other relationships where there is you introduce that thing and it's probably not gone as well as you wanted. So we are very sensitive to whatever your concerns are. But what I'm only requesting is an easy, predictable, and something that the tourism companies can promote, saying that it's and it's not very difficult to get. So
Right. And I would imagine it's difficult in India because you have such a big country. And I'm sure we have the embassy, of course, in Delhi, but I don't know how many consulates we have. Maybe we probably have a consulate in Mumbai.
yes,
But I would imagine it would be difficult for Indians to get a Philippine visa.
cities like Chennai as well. So, but it is not as easy as an electronic visa or
Yes.
a visa on arrival. So I think a visa on arrival or some sort of faster processing for groups or families, this will make it very, very attractive.
And again, I'm asking this with keeping in mind that you've only been here 3 months. But what are so far that you've noticed? What are some of the biggest misconceptions about India from the Filipinos you've talked to? I mean, what is it that you'd like Filipinos to think about when they think about India?
I do sense that the level of awareness of India is a little low, and that there may be some stereotypes, the personal experiences with some Indians here or what the Indians here are doing. Perhaps that has colored the perception a little bit. And what I would like Filipinos to look at India and say, just like the Philippines, we're a very young country. Secondly, we are a very rapidly growing economy with a lot of emerging competencies across areas. A country with which the Philippines can profitably engage and to further its own objectives of national development. I would like to see India as a fellow democracy because we have similar values and we have similar structures. So I would lastly and most importantly like to see like Filipinos to see India as a friend, as somebody who wants to work with the Philippines and work together wherever possible to share our experiences and to work to build the Philippines' capacity. Even as we profit from that activity, we'd also like to see a mutually beneficial relationship. This, I think, is already there because it's growing, but it's at a smaller level. We would like to engage with universities, with think tanks, to bring in a broader appreciation of what India has to offer. And we'd like to see more tourism because that helps a lot.
Yes.
More business and conversations.
Well, the last questions I'd like to ask about culture exchange. Do you think there'll be any room for cooperation between Bollywood and Filipino cinema?
I think there are interesting possibilities.
Okay.
Because one of the things that Ambassador Bhagat Singh, you have a very
yes,
dynamic ambassador in Delhi. One of the things he's been doing, I know, is trying to attract Bollywood to come into to Philippines, because Indian tourism tends to follow Bollywood a bit. So if you have a Bollywood movie that is shot in the Philippines, then some of the people from India, they try to come to those locations to see for themselves. So there's some interesting links, but I think Philippines has a dynamic movie industry, and I'm hoping that we can have some sort of production. I know the Philippines is offering some good incentives for production of movies here. We've been having some dialogue with your authorities. We would like to, right now, this phase is a little weak for this discussion, but we hope to have something happen with Ambassador Bhagat Singh's support. We will push for it.
You should reach out to Congressman De Venecia, the son of the former speaker. He's been trying to rally some congressmen about building up the creative industries in the Philippines, and I think they would probably welcome some international collaborations there, especially if it will benefit arts industry. So
we will try and do something on music because you have a very strong philharmonic here. We have some Western music. We also have a Mumbai Philharmonic. So maybe some collaborations there. He's interested in theater. Maybe we can produce an Indian play in the Philippines. A Filipino play can be produced in India. So we discussed a few things.
yeah,
I think we have a cultural exchange program. We want to make it richer. Our only interaction so far has been in our archives. One interesting project I want to mention on the culture side is that India and the Philippines, when our president came to the Philippines last year for the 70th anniversary of diplomatic relations, President Duterte and he had a very interesting discussion on your effort to have the 500-year celebrations and how you wanted to look at pre-colonial Philippines and your linkages. And so we are trying to put together a group that can, in a structured manner, look at the pre-colonial linkages between India and the Philippines on the cultural side. I think there is already a lot of reflections that we have. A lot of Indian words have been used in the Philippines. There are Filipino words have Indian roots, which attest to the cultural connections that we had in the past. So as the Philippines develops a more rounded and a deeper understanding of your own history, and I think we will find that there were some parts of that which were connected to India, which is something that both India and the Philippines should discover and cherish.
Ambassador, one of the other responsibilities I have is I'm chairman of the National Book Development Board, which is a government agency, and maybe there's something that we can do. Of course, this is an aside from Manila Times. Maybe, but our agency can have some projects with India on a book project or a literature exchange project or something like that.
Yeah, we would be fully supportive of that. I think one of the things that we want to do is to bring more Indian books into the Philippines.
I think we can learn a few things about your book publishing industry.
Yeah, it's actually a very competitive industry, and we're very happy to do that on the business side, but also in terms of content. I believe that we would like to have Filipino stories for Indian kids to read, for young people to understand Filipino literature, and vice versa. We'd like to bring some of our literature in, because we're all very familiar with Western literature, perhaps, but not as familiar with each other's literature. And we have very, very rich literature. And I know Philippines has a very strong literary scene.
Yeah. Well, the other opportunity is yoga. I mean, the yoga's become popular in the Philippines. Maybe we can do a little bit of yoga diplomacy as well.
Well, it's interesting you raise yoga because it has obviously become very popular. And one of the things that current foreign policy priorities for India is to connect with the traditional systems of medicine and yoga, because India's concept of well-being is now coming increasingly into discussion worldwide. And so earlier this month or late last month, we had our first, actually on the 13th of November, we had a first workshop on Ayurveda, which is the Indian traditional
Ayurveda, yeah.
We had participation from PTAC, which is your alternative health, organization. And yesterday, when I was speaking to FDA, I mentioned that there were some Indian Ayurvedic products which were requested for registration in the Philippines. And if we could bring in Ayurveda, and Philippines with its biodiversity can be a source for a lot of herbs that are used in the medicines in India as well. So there's a very interesting potential there in combining Ayurveda and yoga and meditation, because these are increasingly coming into discussion as a complex way to address huge public health issues, which can't be addressed purely by hospitals and by doctors. Individuals take charge in a sustainable way, both socially sustainable, in that it brings you more peace, makes you less prone to violence. It brings you a more centered form of existence, and using more natural medicines, trying to live in harmony with nature in that sense. So this is a wonderful field, and India is very much at the heart of this. And I think Philippines has very great strengths which it can discover. So we want to build this. We're trying an MOU with PITA and the National Institute of Ayurveda That's being more or less finalized. That will help to develop the curriculum and to exchange thoughts as to how you could develop your own traditional medicine.
Mr. Ambassador, good morning again. Thank you very much for taking the time to talk to the Manila Times. I was just curious. You've been here in the country for 3 months, and it's just unfortunate that you came at the time of the pandemic. But it would be interesting to know, sir, what would be the first thing that you would do here in our country immediately after the pandemic is over? Like,
That's a good question.
which places would you go to? Like, where would you want to, I mean, which areas would you like to visit in the Philippines and all that? Or what things would you like to experience here in the Philippines?
Well, I would definitely like to visit the very many parts of the Philippines because you have wonderful natural diversity. And what I'd like to do is perhaps start in the south with Davao and the Mindanao region, because there I believe the there are also some very interesting projects where we are talking about agro cooperation in terms of setting up spice farms and things like that. I think uh, Indian companies can play a role there. I'd like to bring that conversation uh, to a more sharper focus because at this stage, uh, that part of the region, perhaps our engagement hasn't kept up as well. Over a period of time, we'd like to see how we can engage with your biodiversity in general, because both India and the Philippines are mega biodiverse countries. So for me, when you say travel, it automatically brings to mind nature and biodiversity. So I've been reading about all these wonderful reserves that you have. I'm just can't wait to go.
I hope that you have a more enjoyable time in the Philippines than you had in Morocco. I mean, we're a lot more green, more lush than Morocco and the Sahara.
For me, it's a great honor to be in the Philippines. As I was mentioning, it's a very big relationship with the potential to grow much bigger. And we do have also a lot of interest in maritime security. During the last Joint Commission meeting, my minister offered to work together on maritime domain awareness, including setting up of what we call coastal surveillance radar systems. You know, just yesterday, we were marking a very unfortunate anniversary of the terrorist attacks in Mumbai.
Mm.
And it's not widely known, but the terrorists in Mumbai came from the sea. So what we did in India thereafter is to make a national effort to create a coastal surveillance radar system that can allow us to look out into the sea and anticipate, trouble before it reaches us. And so what we do is we identify all the shipping that is happening. And we've already signed a white shipping exchange, information exchange agreement between the Indian Navy and the Philippines Coast Guard. We'd like to operationalize that. We'd also work on setting up necessary infrastructure, because you are a archipelagic country with a coastline of, I think, about 36,000 kilometers. So it's a massive requirement in both in terms of development, as the blue economy becomes more and more important, but also in terms of security. So maritime security and the blue economy, following up on the earlier question, will be areas of great priority over the next decade. And interesting thing, we did a campaign from the embassy called Diwali Wanag, Friendship Diwali, where we said, please light a lamp with a Filipino friend and an Indian together to celebrate our friendship. And one of the interesting things I said was that Indians and Filipinos are great seafarers. We are a very big chunk of the international shipping fleet. And we were able to get one person on a ship to light a lamp with a Filipino colleague on that ship. So it was just a manifestation for me about the huge potential that is in the ocean economy, the blue economy, and in the future. So Philippines, very well positioned. And the Prime Minister of India has a new initiative he calls Sagar, which in Sanskrit is ocean. Security and growth for all in the region. So he sees growth and security as two sides of the same coin. And in that framework, we would like to work with the Philippines very actively on maritime security.
Well, thank you for your time. Maybe we can in 2021 have a forum organized by the Manila Times and your embassy. I think this is something that the local Indian chamber and I have been talking about for some time, but we just haven't gotten around. I'm sure you've met Johnny Chatrani.
Yes.
Yes. So he's very keen on promoting us, promoting India, and maybe doing some more collaborations with the Indian Chamber. But we'd like to explore that with you, perhaps in the new year.
Yes, we'd like to do a few things. One, of course, we'd like to have a very sustained engagement with the Manila Times. This will cover events that we organize. When we have speakers, perhaps you could provide a platform. We could have a regular interaction. We'd like to invite you, along with a few other editors from the Philippines, to visit India. I think that's a long overdue thing. We haven't had any visits at editor level for some time. We'd like to correct that. We'd like to, then have you meet various decision makers in India, see firsthand what's happening. Because you can hear me for all you want, but unless you see it, seeing is believing.
Yeah. Thank you, Ambassador. Well, again, I really appreciate your time, and our doors are always open. If there are new developments, just let us know. I think your staff already knows how to get a hold of us, but I'd be happy to give them my cell phone and email also, so they can have a direct access to me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ambassador.
And I look forward to working with you and your team, because we see you as partners in this process of building a relationship. Very, very important partners.
Thank you, Ambassador, and look forward to seeing you once it's safe to go out again.
We'll surely see you soon.